Time for another episode of Council Bluffs Today. Hi, I'm Todd Studer. You've heard me talk several times on the show about my grandmother. And on April 1st, my grandmother celebrated her 100th birthday. And it's quite an accomplishment to have seen what she has seen and to live the life that she lived. And she just passed away just last week. So if you can bear with a grandson that wants to pay tribute to his grandmother, that is what today's show is all about. Her name is Mary Rose Brown, and when someone lives to be 100 years old, it becomes almost impossible to separate their personal story from the story of the country itself. Mary Rose Brown was born on April 1st, 1926, on a farm near Alden, Iowa. And from the moment you begin looking at the timeline of her life, you realize you're talking about someone who lived through nearly every major transformation of modern America. She was born before television, before interstate highways, before air conditioning was common, before men walked on the moon, before computers changed daily life forever. She was born into a world where neighbors still depended on one another for survival, and where rural Iowa communities were held together through church basements, schoolhouses, family farms, and the understanding that people simply took care of each other. The death of her father while she was still young changed the course of her childhood and eventually brought the family to Iowa Falls. And for many people in that area, hardship was not viewed as something extraordinary. It was just part of life. Families adjusted because they had to. Children grew up quickly because circumstances demanded it. And looking back now, it's easy to romanticize the toughness of that generation. But the reality is they were resilient because often they had no other option. Mary Rose came out of that period carrying the kind of quiet strength that so many people from rural Iowa possessed. They learned how to continue forward even when life became uncertain. And yet what stands out about my grandmother, Mary Rose Brown, is that people did not primarily describe her as hardened by life. They described her as joyful. That's a very different thing. There's people who survive hardship and become bitter from it. And then there are people who somehow come through difficult years with their warmth still intact. Mary Rose was firmly in that second category. She spread encouragement everywhere she went. She complimented people, thanked people, made people feel seen. She often said that the man upstairs had a purpose for her life, and she genuinely believed that purpose was to spread joy. That perspective says a great deal about her character because joy is not the same thing as happiness. Happiness often depends on circumstances. Joy is something people carry inside themselves even during difficult seasons. Mary Rose lived through economic hardship, war years, political division, personal loss, and dramatic societal change over the course of a century. Yet, she remained known for encouragement and kindness. That becomes even more remarkable when you think about how easy it would have been to become cynical after witnessing so much change. Education played an important role in her life. She graduated from Iowa Falls High School, attended Ellsworth College, studied at Iowa State Teachers College. For a young woman from rural Iowa during that time period, pursuing higher education reflected both determination and opportunity. It meant she valued learning and personal growth. Eventually, she taught in country schools and first-grade classrooms in Williams, Ackley, and Popejoy. Teaching during that era was not just a profession. Teachers often became central figures within the communities. They shaped generations of children during some of the most formative years of their lives. And if you think about the timing of her teaching career, many of those children would have gone on to become grandparents and great-grandparents themselves by now. That is one of the hidden impacts of someone like Mary Rose Brown. Her influence did not stop with her own family. It extended outward through classrooms, community organizations, church groups, volunteer work, and everyday interactions that accumulated across decades. 100 years is not just a long time. It's enough time to leave fingerprints on an entire community. One of the defining themes of Mary Rose Brown's life was service, not performative service, not service designed for recognition or attention. the kind of service that becomes woven quietly into everyday life until people just begin to associate your name with helping others. As more details emerge about her life, it becomes clear that Mary Rose did not limit herself to one role or one responsibility. She moved constantly toward involvement, toward participation, and toward finding ways to contribute wherever she felt needed. She served as district president of the American Legion Auxiliary, spent time as a Girl Scout leader, volunteered through St. Mark's Church, helped with the church thrift store, prepared taxes for people first through Nisley and then from her own home, and became involved politically through the County Democratic Committee and multiple campaigns. That range of involvement tells you something important about her. Mary Rose was not someone who sat on the sidelines of community life. She believed communities became stronger when people actively participated in them. And perhaps most interesting is how naturally she seemed to move between all those worlds. She could work with veterans organizations, church groups, political campaigns, neighborhood projects, and family activities without treating any of them as separate compartments. For many people from her generation, community involvement was just an extension of daily life. You did not ask whether you had time to volunteer, you volunteered because that's what people did when they cared about where they live. She met and hosted presidents, first ladies, and political candidates over the years. Imagine the experiences and conversations contained inside a life like that. Imagine the stories she must have accumulated over decades of political involvement during some of the most turbulent periods in American history. She witnessed elections stretching from Franklin Roosevelt to the modern political era. She saw the civil rights movement, Vietnam, Watergate, the Cold War, and every cultural shift that followed. Yet through all of it, she remained civically engaged rather than withdrawing from public life. One of the details that stands out most strongly is her participation in AARP's National Get Out the Vote initiative, which became one of the accomplishments she was most proud of. That reveals another important part of her personality. Mary Rose did not believe age meant disengagement. Even later in life, she remained connected to causes larger than herself. She traveled across the country encouraging civic participation and voter involvement because she believed people should remain engaged in democracy and community life. That says a great deal about how she viewed responsibility and citizenship. There's also something deeply Iowa about the way she served. Much of what she did was practical, preparing taxes for people, helping organize community efforts, assisting with church work, supporting veterans initiatives, helping her husband gather names for the Veterans Memorial in Iowa Falls, assisting with placing flagpoles throughout the community. These are not glamorous acts, they are grounded acts. They're the kind of contributions that strengthen the texture of everyday community life. And often, those contributions go unnoticed until someone is gone and people suddenly realize how many spaces that person occupied. That realization happens frequently after the death of deeply involved community members. People begin saying things like, I didn't realize how much she did, or she was there whenever something needed done. Mary Rose Brown appears to have been one of those people whose influence became almost invisible because it was so consistent. She simply just became part of the fabric of Iowa Falls itself. You know, the story of Mary Rose Brown is also the story of a marriage that lasted nearly 70 years. In today's world, where relationships are often discussed in terms of temporary compatibility, there's something profoundly grounding about a partnership that endured across 7 decades of changing life circumstances. Mary Rose and Bert Brown were married until Bert's passing in 2015, and together they built not just a household, but a multi-generational family identity that continued expanding long after their children became adults. People sometimes underestimate how much discipline, patience, forgiveness, and commitment are required to sustain a marriage over that length of time. A 70-year marriage survives economic struggles, illnesses, disagreements, changing seasons of life, career transitions, aging, grief, and countless ordinary days that require people to continue choosing one another over and over again. Relationships of that length become less about grand gestures and more about consistency. They become partnerships rooted in shared history. Together, they raised 4 children, and over time, the family continued growing into grandchildren, great grandchildren, in laws, extended relatives, and what sounds like an ever expanding circle of people who felt connected to Mary Rose personally. One of the most revealing lines in her obituary says that every member of the family believed they were her favorite. It's not accidental. Some people possess a rare ability to make whoever they are speaking with feel uniquely valued in that moment, and it appears Mary Rose had that gift. And perhaps even more telling is the mention of adults outside the family whom she claimed she wanted to adopt. That line says everything about the kind of presence she had. There are certain people whose warmth naturally creates emotional safety for others. Younger people gravitate toward them. Friends seek them out for encouragement. Communities begin treating them almost like honorary family because they radiate acceptance rather than judgment. Mary Rose had developed that reputation over many decades, and it's easy to understand why. Encouragement was not something she did occasionally. Now, according to everyone in her family, including me, it was how she moved through the world. She thanked people and complimented people, lifted them up. In an era where public conversation increasingly feels cynical and combative, those qualities stand out even more sharply. People remember kindness because it has become comparatively rare. There's also an important lesson hidden inside the way Mary Rose approached family life. She appears to have understood that love is expressed through attention. People remember whether someone showed interest in their lives. They remember whether someone celebrated their victories, encouraged them during difficult times, and made them feel important. By all accounts, Mary Rose consistently gave people that feeling. And when families gather after the loss of someone like this, the stories that emerge are rarely about dramatic moments. They're about conversations, phone calls, holiday gatherings, encouraging words, little acts of generosity. The emotional memory of how someone made others feel over the course of many years, and those things become the true inheritance families carry forward. For a family spread across multiple generations, Mary Rose Brown became a central thread connecting everyone together, not because she demanded that role, but because love naturally positioned her there. S&B Country Kennel is the top spot in Southwest Iowa when you need to know your dog will receive only the best. Boarding, daycare, grooming, self-washing, training, and even a membership available to a dog park over an acre in size. S&B Country Kennel also has rescue dogs, so check with them about adoption possibilities. sbcountrykennel.com, that's country spelled with a K, located just west of I-29 on Bungie Avenue, south of Council Bluffs. If you have a leak, a clogged drain, or even if you're planning a big remodel, Waldstein Plumbing in Council Bluffs has you covered. With fast, reliable service and expert craftsmanship, handling everything from small repairs to major installations. They're locally owned and trusted and take pride in doing the job right the first time. Residential or commercial, big or small, when plumbing problems strike, they're the ones to call. Visit waldsteinplumbing.com. By the time someone reaches 100 years old, they've usually seen enough of life to understand what truly matters and what doesn't. That perspective changes people. Small frustrations stop carrying the same weight. Status becomes less important. The opinions of strangers matter less. But what begins to matter more are relationships, purpose, faith, and whether your life leaves people better than you found them. In so many ways, Mary Rose Brown appears to have spent her life focused on exactly those things. One of the most remarkable parts of her story is how she is engaged in remaining with life even as the years continued adding up. There are people who slowly withdraw from the world as they age, and then there are people who remain curious, interested, and involved until the very end. Mary Rose clearly belonged in that second category. She continued taking part in civic life, continued building relationships. She continued encouraging others and continued looking outward instead of inward. That mindset alone likely contributed to the energy people consistently described around her. She seemed to understand something that many people struggle to learn. Purpose is not tied to age. A person does not stop mattering because they get older. Their ability to contribute simply changes shape over time. In younger years, contribution may come through physical labor or raising children, and later in life, it may come through wisdom, encouragement, perspective, and emotional steadiness. Mary Rose carried those later roles beautifully. People asked and talked about her positivity. But positivity in someone like Mary Rose was not shallow optimism. It came from perspective earned over the decades. She had lived long enough to know difficult seasons eventually pass. She had experienced enough hardship to understand that people need encouragement more than criticism. She had watched enough conflict unfold to realize kindness has a longer shelf life than anger. That kind of perspective changes the emotional atmosphere around a person. Some individuals drain energy from a room when they enter it. Others bring warmth, calmness, and connection with them. Mary Rose seemed to have carried that second kind of presence almost everywhere she went. People remembered how she made them feel because she made a conscious effort to notice them. She complimented people sincerely and thanked people often and celebrated others naturally. Those habits sound simple, but over the course of a century, they become powerful. And maybe that is one of the greatest lessons from her life. Most people dramatically underestimate the long term impact of consistent encouragement. A compliment given at the right moment can stay with someone for years. A kind word during a difficult season can change the emotional direction of a person's day, week, or even life. Mary Rose understood that instinctively. She seemed to believe lifting people up was not optional. It was part of why she was here. There's also something very meaningful about the fact that she maintained such strong community ties throughout her life. In modern culture, people often become increasingly isolated as they age and communities become fragmented. Families spread out geographically, social circles shrink, but Mary Rose continued finding ways to remain connected to people and causes larger than herself. That matters because all of us human beings, we're not designed to live disconnected lives. Community gives people identity, support, and purpose. Now, my grandmother's generation understood that more naturally than many do today because they belong to churches, civic groups, auxiliaries, volunteer organizations, neighborhood efforts, and local causes because those connections created a sense of shared responsibility. Mary Rose did not simply observe community life, she actively participated in shaping it, whether through church work, volunteer efforts, veterans causes, political engagement, or just acts of kindness. She consistently chose involvement over isolation. And when someone spends decades doing that, they eventually become woven into the emotional memory of an entire town. Their presence becomes familiar and their absence is noticeable. Their influence quietly spreads far beyond what they themselves may ever fully realize. Service Master Restore by Schmader knows it can be hard to get things back to normal when you've suffered serious property damage due to flooding, fire, or smoke, and that can oftentimes lead to mold, and you may be left with all sorts of questions about how to get your home or business back to normal. It's easy. You give Cindy Schmader a call with Service Master Restore by Schmader. Her phone number, 402-339-9911. Tired of hot rooms, harsh glare, and zero privacy? Tint Advantage has the solution. With advanced window film, you can cut heat before it even enters your home or business, reduce glare on screens, and keep your natural light in view. And with smart film, your glass goes from clear to private in seconds. Total control, right at your fingertips. Comfort, privacy, and efficiency, all in one upgrade. Visit tintadvantage.com and take control of your space today. So when people speak about Mary Rose Brown, there is a recurring sense that she genuinely enjoyed people. It's not a small thing. It's really not. Many people tolerate social interaction. Some people navigate it out of obligation, but there are rare individuals who truly delight in human connection. They enjoy hearing stories and they enjoy conversations. They enjoy learning about people's lives and they enjoy making others feel welcome. Mary Rose carried that spirit throughout her entire life. That quality explains why so many people felt personally connected to her, and it's not limited to immediate family or lifelong friends. And even newer acquaintances seem to walk away feeling valued by her attention and warmth. Some people possess an unusual ability to make interactions feel personal instead of transactional. They listen fully and they engage sincerely. They make eye contact and they remember details. They make others feel important rather than making themselves the center of attention. Those are not dramatic qualities, but over decades, they create deep and lasting relationships. And relationships really were the center of Mary Rose's life. Not accomplishments in the traditional sense, not prestige and not recognition. The true measure of her life is the network of people she loved and encouraged over 100 years. That kind of legacy is not measured financially or professionally. It's only measured emotionally through the number of people whose lives were brighter because she was part of them. There's something especially moving about imagining the scale of memory that's attached to a life that lasts a century. Think about how many birthdays she celebrated, how many Christmas mornings she experienced, how many graduations and weddings, baptisms, reunions, family dinners. Think about how many conversations she had while sitting at the table or in the living room or at church events or during ordinary afternoons at that time. And they probably all felt insignificant then, yet later, those moments became cherished memories for someone else. That's the strange beauty of a long life. The smallest moments often become the ones people hold on to most tightly after someone is gone. A grandchild remembers laughter during a holiday meal. A friend remembers an encouraging conversation during a difficult season. A neighbor remembers feeling welcomed, and a family member remembers a handwritten note or a phone call. Piece by piece, those moments accumulate into a life that leaves permanent marks on other people. Mary Rose also represented something increasingly rare in modern life. That is, continuity. She connected generations together. Younger relatives could sit beside her and hear stories reaching back nearly a century. She personally remembered a version of Iowa and America that now exists only in photographs and fading memories. Through her, our family history remained alive and tangible instead of abstract. That role became incredibly important in families because people need roots and they need stories. They need connection to something larger than themselves. Mary Rose carried those stories with her for 100 years, and she passed them forward through conversation, memory, humor, tradition, and love. So, even though her time on earth is now ended, those stories do not disappear, and neither does her influence. The habits she modeled continue through her children and for her grandchildren. The kindness she demonstrated continues through the people she encouraged. The sense of community she believed in continues every time family members gather together and remember not only what she said, but who she was. In the end, that may be the clearest picture of Mary Rose Brown's legacy. She spent 100 years investing in people, not because she expected anything in return, but because she believed human connection itself mattered. After a century of life, that belief became the defining imprint she left behind. My grandmother lived 100 years, and I knew her for 57, and I enjoyed every one of them. Thank you for listening. Click that share and like button if you would, please. Help us spread all the great information that's going out. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a little nostalgic today and thinking back on a wonderful lady. And I'm going to miss you, Grandma. And also, do something about this light, will you? It's making my hair really white. My name's Todd Studer. Wraps up today's episode of Council Bluffs Today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.